Ashford, Georgia, Fulton County Superior Court, Division 4. A Tuesday morning in March, the sky outside a pale, impersonal gray, the kind of sky that withholds. No warmth in it, no texture, just the flat, even light of a morning that has arrived without commitment, that offers nothing beyond illumination. Inside Courtroom 4, 79 people had arranged themselves in the specific, compressed way of a gallery that has filled beyond its intended capacity, and knows it. People pressed along the walls, standing in the side aisles, seated in the narrow spaces between designated rows that the bailiff had tried and failed to keep clear. Nobody had come to this building today without understanding what the morning was. Nobody had arrived uncertain about what they were there to witness. They had been waiting 8 months. Mara Elise Voss, 17 years old, entered at 9:02 through the side door, and what the gallery saw first, before the navy dress her mother had selected, before the careful arrangement of her expression, before anything deliberate, was the same thing they had been seeing across 8 months of proceedings. Her performance. Mara Voss had been, for 8 months, performing. Not in the crude sense of lying or masking, though those things were present. In the deeper sense of someone who has understood, possibly since childhood, that the management of how others perceive you is the most consequential skill available to a person, and who has developed that skill with the specific, total commitment that other people devote to music or mathematics. She had understood, possibly before she fully understood the word, that narrative was power. That whoever controlled the story of what had happened controlled almost everything that followed. She had been controlling the story since July. She was still controlling it now. She entered the courtroom with the expression she had worn to every proceeding, a calibrated, layered expression that communicated simultaneously gravity, suffering, and a specific quality of wrong dignity. The expression of a girl who has accepted that she will be misunderstood and has arrived at a kind of sorrowful, resigned grace about it. She moved to the defendant's table with her eyes slightly lowered, not looking at the gallery, not looking at the family seated in the second row on the right side of the room, performing the specific dignity of someone who has decided that looking directly at the people who hate her would be unkind. She sat. She folded her hands. She arranged her face. In the second row, Lin Huang did not look away from her. Lin Huang was 41 years old. She was a medical billing specialist who had worked for the same healthcare network for 14 years. She had raised Destiny alone since Destiny's father moved back to Chengdu when Destiny was 3, had done it in the specific, focused way of a parent who has identified the most important task in front of them and has organized everything else around it. She had watched Destiny become the person she had been becoming, the swimmer, the student, the girl who kept a collection of pressed flowers in a journal, and who had, in the months before July, been accepted to a summer research program in marine biology. She had been in the second row every day of these proceedings. She had watched Mara Voss perform for 8 months. She was watching her perform now. She was not going to look away. What happened in July, what the investigation established and the trial record documented, requires its own telling, because the shape of Mara's performance across 8 months cannot be fully understood without the shape of what she was performing away from. Destiny Huang had been 16 years old. She had been the kind of person who pressed flowers because she found them beautiful and she wanted to hold them specifically, not as a sentimental gesture, but as the specific practice of someone who believes that beautiful things deserve to be preserved in the form in which they were beautiful. She had been pressing flowers since she was 9 years old, in journals that she kept on a shelf in her bedroom, organized by year. The journals were still on the shelf. Lin had not moved them. She had been on the swim team at Ashford High School since the 9th grade. Not as the fastest swimmer on the team, she had never been the fastest, but as the swimmer who improved the most reliably each season, who approached training with the patient, incremental attention of someone who understands that the gap between where you are and where you can be as closed one session at a time. Her coach had described her in the statement submitted to the prosecution as the athlete you build a team around not because of talent, though the talent was real, but because of character. She made everyone around her better. She and Mara Voss had been in the same social orbit for 2 years, not close friends. DS, not in the specific, woven-together way of genuine closeness, but present in the same spaces enough to have accumulated a history. A history that had, in the spring of the year they both turned 16, developed an edge. The edge was a boy. His name does not matter to the story in the way that the story matters. What matters is the specific social dynamic the situation produced, Mara's interpretation of Destiny's closeness to someone Mara had designated as exclusively hers, and the specific quality of feeling that interpretation generated in Mara, who was not accustomed to the experience of something she considered hers being threatened. Mara did not handle competition. This was known to the people who knew her well, known in the way that the central facts about a person's character are known by the people who have moved through enough situations with them to have seen it revealed. She did not handle it in the dramatic, visible way of someone who loses control. She handled it in the way of someone who manages, who calculates, who deploys narrative. She began, in the spring, running a story about Destiny in the social infrastructure of Ashford High. The specific, targeted story that is impossible to formally attribute and impossible to fully defend against, conducted through whisper and inference, and the deliberate cultivation of people's worst interpretive instincts. Destiny had known about the story. She had told her mother in April. Lynn had told her to document what she was experiencing, to keep a record. Destiny had kept a record. The record in a notes application on her phone, in emails to her swim coach, in a conversation with the school counselor that had been documented by the counselor, would become part of the trial evidence. The record documented 7 incidents across the spring in which Mara had conducted specific, targeted social sabotage directed at Destiny. It documented the specifics of each incident with the patient, precise attention of a girl who had been told to document and had done it carefully. The record ended in June. On July 9th, at approximately 2 in the morning, a fire started in the laundry room of the apartment building where the Huang family lived. The laundry room was adjacent to the building's rear stairwell, the stairwell that served as the primary exit for the second and third floors. A blocked, burning stairwell at 2 in the morning meant the residents of those floors had limited options for egress. A narrow fire escape on the building's north face, accessible from the hallway window, or the front stairwell, which was partially affected by smoke from the laundry room. Destiny's apartment was on the 3rd floor. Lynn was at work, the overnight shift she took 3 times a week to manage the household finances. Destiny had been home alone. She had not been found on the fire escape. She had been found by a firefighter on the 3rd floor hallway, overcome by smoke inhalation, 8 minutes after the first unit arrived. She was transported to Ashford Regional Medical Center. She died at 6:41 in the morning of July 10th from smoke inhalation and acute respiratory failure. She had been 16 years old. The pressed flower journals were on the shelf. Lynn arrived at the hospital at 7:19, having been called by a neighbor. She arrived 12 minutes after Destiny died. She sat in a waiting room chair and a nurse came and told her, and she sat in the chair for a very long time. The fire investigation, conducted concurrently by the Ashford Fire Department's arson unit and the Fulton County Sheriff's Office, produced, within 2 weeks, a finding of deliberate origin. Accelerant had been used in the laundry room. A specific commercial fire-starting product had been identified through residue analysis. The accelerant had been placed deliberately against the base of the door, connecting the laundry room to the rear stairwell. the specific placement of someone who understood what blocking that stairwell would do to egress from the upper floors. Detective Samuel Cross had been assigned on July 11th. He had been an investigator for 16 years, and he had worked arson cases, and he understood the specific, methodical patience that arson investigation required. The forensic evidence was rarely conclusive in isolation. The physical evidence pointed toward origin and cause, but rarely toward a person. And the path from the physical evidence to the human responsible ran through other kinds of evidence that had to be assembled with care. He assembled it with care. The first substantive lead arrived through Destiny's phone record, specifically through the content of Destiny's Notes application, which Lynn had given investigators access to in the first week of the investigation. Cross read the documentation of 7 incidents. He read the careful, specific language of a girl who had been keeping records the way her mother told her to. Age. He went to the school. He spoke to the counselor. He spoke to the swim coach. He spoke to 4 of Destiny's friends, each of whom described the same spring dynamic from their own angle. He spoke to 3 of Mara's acquaintances, people who moved through Mara's social world and had their own knowledge of how that world operated. And then he obtained, through a subpoena to the relevant platform, the search history on the device registered to Mara Elise Voss. The searches began on June 28th. They included fire accelerant types, what burns fast in a building, how to start a fire without being seen, apartment building fire exits. They ended on July 6th. The fire was July 9th. He obtained the text messages. On June 30th, Mara had sent a message to a girl named Sasha that read, "I'm going to solve this problem. She thinks she can just keep doing what she's doing. She doesn't know what I'm capable of." On July 7th, 2 days before the fire, "After this week she won't be a problem anymore." On July 10th, at 6:52 in the morning, 11 minutes after Destiny died, Mara had sent Sasha a message. It was 4 words. It said she should have moved. Cross read this 4 times. Then he drove to the district attorney's office. Ada Patricia Osei, 39 years old, 8 years in the Fulton County DA's office, read the case file over 3 hours and looked at Cross when she was done. "Premeditated," she said. "Yes," Cross said. "She researched it, she planned the placement, she knew which stairwell to block." "Yes." "And she texted she should have moved 11 minutes after the death." "Yes." Osei looked at the case file for a long moment. "Charge her with murder," she said, "first degree." The arrest of Mara Voss on July 19th produced, in Ashford, something that Cross had not fully anticipated. A significant portion of the community did not believe it. Mara had been running her narrative since spring, and the narrative had been effective. People who knew Mara, who had seen her perform suffering across the months of the spring's social conflict, had absorbed the story she was telling about herself. They had understood Mara as the wronged party, as the girl who had been targeted by Destiny, whose relationship had been interfered with, who had been made to suffer. The narrative had been so effective that, when the arrest came, a meaningful segment of Ashford High's social community found themselves with an instinctive response of disbelief. Not because they had examined the evidence was not public, but because the story they had been given did not include Mara Voss as someone who did something like this. She managed this response carefully. Through the arraignment and the transfer hearing and the months of pretrial proceedings, Mara maintained the performance that had always served her. She was cooperative, composed, sorrowful in the specific calibrated way that communicated wrongful accusation rather than guilt. She and her attorney, a private defense lawyer named Gerald Marsh, retained by her parents at considerable cost, crafted a defense narrative that built on the foundation Mara had already laid. That the conflict with Destiny had been mutual, that Mara had been the one who was afraid, that she had been receiving threats, that she had been living in fear for months. The defense argued self-defense, not in the direct sense, not claiming Mara had set the fire as an immediate response to a physical threat, but in the broader narrative sense of positioning Mara as someone who had been backed into a corner by months of escalating fear. It was the same story Mara had been telling since spring. The same story, scaled up, applied to a fire and a death. The trial lasted 7 days. I built the prosecution's case with the methodical, complete attention of someone who has been preparing for 8 months, and who understands that the specific challenge of this case is not the evidence. The evidence is comprehensive, but the narrative. That the jury needs to be given the full alternative to the story Mara has been telling, assembled piece by piece, until the alternative is undeniable. She presented the search history. She presented the texts to Sasha. She presented Destiny's documentation of 7 incidents, read by Destiny's swim coach, in a voice that the court reporter noted in her transcript as requiring 2 pauses for the witness to compose herself. She presented the arson unit's finding on accelerant placement, the specific, expert testimony establishing that the positioning of the accelerant against the rear stairwell door was not consistent with an impulsive act, but with deliberate knowledge of the building's egress layout. She presented on the 4th day the testimony of a girl named Portia Wells, who had been one of Mara's closer acquaintances and who had decided, after 7 months of sitting with what she knew, that sitting with it was no longer possible. Portia was 17, and she testified with the specific, rehearsed steadiness of someone who has made a decision and has practiced it enough to deliver it cleanly. Mara told me in June that she was going to do something about Destiny, Portia said. I asked her what she meant. She said I didn't need to know what she meant. She said Destiny had been a problem for too long and she was going to stop being one. Did you take that as a threat? Osa asked. I didn't know what to do with it, Portia said. Mara says things, she says things dramatically. I thought she meant she was going to do something social, something online. I didn't, she stopped. I didn't think she meant this. She looked at the jury. I should have said something, she said. I've thought about that every day since July. The defense cross-examination challenged the interpretation, the reliability of Portia's recollection, the ambiguity of "I'm going to do something about this" as a statement of criminal intent. Portia held her account. On the 5th day, Osai played, through the testimony of the digital forensic examiner, the text sent at 6:52 on the morning of July 10th. She should have moved. The courtroom was very still when the words appeared on the screen. In the 2nd row, Lin Huang looked at the words on the screen and then looked at Mara Voss and held her gaze there for a long time. Mara did not look at the screen. She looked at the defense table. Her expression was the expression she always maintained for difficult moments, the sorrowful, dignified composure of the wrongly accused. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. They returned a verdict of guilty on the charge of murder in the 1st degree. Mara Voss sat at the defendant's table when the verdict was read and maintained the expression she had worn for 7 days. And then, for the first time in the trial, for the first time in 8 months of proceedings, the expression shifted. Not into remorse. Not into the acknowledgement of what the word meant. Into something harder and more specific, the expression of someone who has been betting on an outcome and has just received information that the bet did not pay off. The expression of a calculation revised. It lasted 2 seconds. Then the composure reasserted itself. Lin Huang in the 2nd row had been watching. She had seen it. The sentencing hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. In the 3 weeks between the verdict and the sentencing, Mara Voss and her attorney prepared. The preparation involved, as all sentencing preparation involves, a review of the factors the court would consider, the mitigation available to present, the sentencing memorandum that would frame the case for minimum or reduced sentence. Gerald Marsh was thorough, and his memorandum was thorough. Mara's age, her prior record, the developmental research, the possibility of rehabilitation. It also involved, though no one outside the Voss household was aware of it, the preparation of a statement. Mara intended to speak at the sentencing. She had been intending to speak since the verdict. She had been performing for 8 months with the specific goal of generating sympathy, of maintaining the victim narrative, of keeping enough people believing enough of her story that the outcome remained uncertain. The verdict had removed the legal uncertainty, but Mara understood, in the specific, intuitive way she understood the mechanics of perception, that the sentencing hearing was a different kind of room, that the judge had heard the evidence but had not heard her, not directly. Not in her own voice, making her own case, looking at the room and making the room feel what she needed the room to feel. She was good at this. She had always been good at this. She believed, in a way that had been formed across 17 years of managing rooms with her performance, that if she could speak directly and completely, and in the register she had been developing since the spring, the register of wronged, suffering, misunderstood girl, she could change something. Not the verdict. She was not delusional about the verdict, but the sentence, the way the judge understood what she had done and why and what she was. She prepared her statement with the same care she brought to everything she prepared. Marsh had advised against it. She had overruled him with the specific, firm certainty of someone who has spent 17 years being right about how rooms work. She was going to speak. She had a right to speak. She was going to tell her story one final time, in the room where it most needed to be told, with the full weight of everything she had built across 8 months behind it. She walked into the sentencing hearing on a Tuesday morning in March, and she arranged herself at the defendant's table, and she looked at the room with the expression she had chosen. She did not look at Lin Hua. Ng. She had never once looked at Lin Huang. Judge Constance Bell entered at 9 o'clock. Everyone rose. Bell was 58 years old, 22 years on the Fulton County Superior Court bench. She was a compact woman with close-cropped silver hair and the bearing of someone who has spent 2 decades in a position of authority and has stopped thinking about the bearing because it has become simply how she holds herself. She was not a theatrical judge. She did not perform gravity or manufacture the weight of her rulings through pacing or dramatic pause. She was known in the county legal community for one quality above all others. She wasted nothing. Not time, not words, not attention. She gave each case exactly what it required and not one syllable more. She took the bench. She looked at the room. She looked at the defendant's table. She looked at Mara Voss. She had been looking at Mara Voss across 8 months of proceedings, across 7 days of trial, with the specific, accumulating attention of a judge who knows that the full picture of a person does not arrive in any single moment, but assembles itself across time from the evidence of each individual one. She had assembled the picture. She called the case. The State of Georgia versus Mara Elise Voss, convicted, following trial, of murder in the first degree in the death of Destiny Huang. We are here for sentencing. She looked at the Huang family. The court will hear from the victim's family. Lin Huang approached the podium. She had been preparing for this for 3 weeks, but the preparation had been different from how most people prepare for things. She had not rehearsed what she was going to say. She had written it once, in a single sitting, at 1 in the morning when the house was completely quiet, and she had not looked at it again until this morning. She had brought it with her in a plain envelope, and she had taken it out in the car, and she had read it and she had put it back in the envelope. She carried the envelope to the podium. She set it on the surface. She looked at the room. My daughter's name was Destiny, she said. She was 16 years old. She pressed flowers. She kept them in journals organized by year. She had been doing this since she was 9 years old. There are 7 journals on the shelf in her room. I have not moved them. Her voice was even. She was a swimmer. She improved every season because she believed that the gap between where you are and where you can be is closed one session at a time. Her coach told me that she made every other swimmer on the team better, not because she was the fastest, because of who she was while she was swimming. She looked at the bench. She was documenting something, she said. I had told her to document it. I had said, keep a record, be precise, so that when you need to show someone what has been happening, you have it exactly. She was careful and thorough because that was how she did things. She stopped. The documentation stopped in June, she said, because in July she was gone. She opened the envelope. She removed the paper. She looked at it briefly. I want to read one thing, she said, from Destiny's Notes application, not the documentation of incidents. There is enough of that in the trial record. Something else. She looked at the paper. On May 14th, Destiny made an entry in her notes that was not documentation. It was something else. It was something she wrote for herself, not for the record. It said, I think the thing about Mara is that she doesn't understand that other people are as real as she is. I'm not sure she's ever understood that. Maybe she can learn it. People can learn things. She let the words sit. May 14th, she said, 2 months before the fire, Destiny was still hoping. She folded the paper. She was still hoping that Mara could learn the thing she needed to learn. That was who my daughter was. She believed in people's capacity to learn. She looked at the defendant's table. She looked at Mara Voss. Mara was looking at the bench. I want the court to understand something about what happened to my daughter that the legal record captures in part and that I need to say completely, Lynn said. Destiny was not the aggressor in what happened between these 2 girls this spring. She was not the one who was afraid. She was the one who was being documented not by herself but about herself, by a campaign specifically designed to damage her. She documented back because I told her to. And then she was killed. She looked at the bench. She should have been allowed to keep swimming, she said. She should have been allowed to keep pressing flowers. She should have gone to the marine biology program this summer. She should have turned 17. She should have been allowed to grow up. She should have been allowed to discover whether Mara Voss could learn the thing she needed to learn. She returned to her seat. Poor. Tia Wells spoke second. She was brief and direct. I should have said something in June, she said. I have said this before, and I say it here because I want it in the record of this proceeding. I am not going to spend my life being the person who didn't say something. She sat down. Destiny's swim coach, Raymond Torres, spoke third. He described a swimmer. He described a season. He described the specific quality of someone who made everyone around them better. And he did it in the careful, specific language of someone who has spent many years helping young people understand what they were capable of, and who knows, from professional experience, how rarely you encounter the specific combination of talent and character that Destiny had, and how long those encounters stay with you. I have coached for 19 years, he said. I have had remarkable athletes. Destiny was remarkable in the way that lasts, not in the way of a record, but in the way of the person you remember when you want to remind yourself why the work matters. He sat down. The gallery was very still. Judge Bell looked at the defendant's table. Ms. Voss, I understand you wish to make a statement. Marsh put a hand on Mara's arm. Mara was already standing. She had prepared for this moment with the total, organized attention she brought to everything she performed. She had the statement in her head. She had a version of it in her pocket. She had assembled it out of every element of the narrative she had been constructing since spring. The fear, the escalation, the sense of being misunderstood, the specific, calibrated register of a wronged girl who has finally been given the space to make herself understood. She turned slightly toward the gallery. She was not looking at the bench. She was looking at the room. She began, "I have been waiting for the opportunity to speak directly to everyone here, because the trial, through no fault of anyone's, presented only one version of what the past year has been for me. And I know that a lot of people in this room have been waiting to hear from me directly. So I want to say." Judge Bell said, "Ms. Voss." Myra stopped. She looked at the bench. Judge Bell was looking at her, not with the expression of someone preparing to deliver an extended judicial address, not with the building quality of a judge who is about to say something that has been forming across months of preparation, with the flat, complete attention of someone who has listened and has decided. She said nothing for 3 seconds. The room was completely still. 3 seconds in which every person present understood, in the specific way that rooms understand things before they are stated, that something was about to happen that was not what they had expected. Then Judge Bell said, clearly and without inflection, "Take her away." That was all. 3 words. The courtroom froze. It froze in the specific way of a room that has been given information its framework could not process, that has expected a continuation, an address, the extended formal language of a judicial proceeding, and has received instead 3 words and then silence. The silence was total. Nobody in the room made a sound. Not the gallery, not the attorneys, not the court reporter. 3 seconds of absolute, complete stillness. And then the court officers moved. Marsh was on his feet. "Your Honor." "The defendant will be removed," Bell said. Her voice did not change register by a degree. "Mr. Marsh, you may request a brief recess to consult with your client before we proceed." Marsh was already moving toward Mara, his mouth forming words that the room could not hear because the room was still absorbing what had happened. Myra Voss looked at Judge Bell. Her expression, the performing expression, the carefully assembled expression that had been managing this room and every room for 8 months, had collapsed. Not into grief or remorse. Into something rawer and more fundamental, the specific, exposed blankness of a person whose instrument has been taken from them before they could play it, who had arrived at the moment they had been preparing for, and had been answered with 3 words and a silence that said, more completely than any speech could say it, that the room had heard everything it needed to hear and was done receiving. She was led through the side door. It closed. The room remained frozen for several seconds after. Frozen in the specific way of people who have watched something and are still processing it, not the content, which was simple, but the meaning of the simplicity, the weight of what had been said by the refusal to say more. The specific power of a judge who had decided that Mara Voss had been talking for 8 months and would not be talking in this room again. Marsh requested the recess. Bell granted it. The gallery did not talk during the recess. That was the most remarkable thing, a packed courtroom. 29 people who had been waiting 8 months, sitting in near silence through 15 minutes of recess, not because they had been asked to, because the room had assumed, without direction, the quality of the moment and had decided to hold it. When the recess ended, Marsh addressed the bench briefly on the record, noting his client's removal, preserving the objection for appeal, fulfilling his professional obligations with the compressed efficiency of someone doing what is required. Bell nodded and opened her sentencing order. She delivered the sentence to the room, to the gallery, to the record, to every person present except the defendant, who was in a holding area beyond the side door. She said, Destiny Huang was 16 years old. She pressed flowers. She swam. She documented what was happening to her because her mother told her to, and she did it carefully because that was how she did things. She looked at Lin Huang. She wrote in May that she hoped Mara Voss could learn that other people are as real as she is. She wrote that people can learn things. She paused. Mara Voss walked into this room this morning and attempted to use this sentencing hearing the same way she has used every room she has been given access to for 8 months, as a stage, as an opportunity to perform the narrative she has been constructing since she began calculating how to manage the outcome of her own actions. She looked at the gallery. This court gave her 30 seconds, she said. That is all that was available to her in this room. 30 seconds and 3 words, because this court is not a stage. It is a room where Destiny Huang deserves the full weight of what happened to her to be named and answered, and that naming and answering does not require Mara Voss's performance. It has been named already, by the evidence, by the verdict, and by the people who love Destiny who have stood at that podium this morning. She looked at the sentencing order. Mara Elise Voss is sentenced to life in the Georgia Department of Corrections, with the possibility of parole consideration after 40 years served. She looked at Lin Huang. She will be 57 before any review is required, she said. Destiny Huang will be 16 forever. She struck the gavel. Once, the room released slowly, not in the way of a crowd exiting, in the way of people who are not quite ready to stop being in the place where they are, who need a few additional moments to let what happened settle before they can move. Lin Huang sat in the second row for a long time. She was not alone. Beside her was her sister, who had driven from Atlanta the previous evening and who had been in the courthouse since 7:30. She had held Lin's hand during Raymond Torres' testimony, and she was holding it now. Lin thought about the pressed flower journals. She thought about 7 journals on a shelf, organized by year. She thought about the entry from May 14th. I think the thing about Mara is that she doesn't understand that other people are as real as she is. Maybe she can learn it. People can learn things. She thought about her daughter at 16, documenting a campaign against her with the careful, precise attention of someone who had been told to keep a record, and had believed that the record was the tool that would eventually protect her. It had not protected her, but it had been in the room. It had been read by a judge. It had been in the sentence. The 47 years before parole review. The specific naming of what it was. She was not satisfied. Satisfaction was not what this morning had given her, and she had not come for satisfaction. She had come for the record to be complete, for the room to hold, formally and permanently, what had been done, for the sentence to carry the weight. The sentence carried the weight. She gathered herself and stood. She walked out of the courthouse into the March morning, into the flat, impersonal gray light, and she stood on the steps for a moment and looked at the city below. Somewhere in the building she had just left, Mara Voss was being processed back into custody. She was 17 years old, and she would be 57 before the state was required to consider whether she had become someone different from the girl who had put accelerant against a stairwell door, and then texted that Destiny should have moved. She had 40 years to find the thing Destiny had hoped she could find. The thing people can learn. Whether she found it was not Lin Huang's to know or care about. What was Lin Huang's was the journals. 7 of them. On a shelf in a room whose door she would eventually be able to open. Not yet, but eventually. She walked down the courthouse steps. Her sister walked beside her. The gray sky offered nothing and asked for nothing. It was enough. Portia Wells went back to school. She sat in her classes and she ate lunch and she walked through T.H.E. hallways of Ashford High School with the specific, slightly altered quality of presence that belongs to someone who has done something that costs something, and who has come out on the other side of the cost, knowing what they know. She had testified. She had said what she had seen and what she had heard. She had done it slowly. It had taken her too long. She had sat with what she knew for too long, but she had done it. She was going to carry that. Not as a burden, as a fact about herself that she intended to build on, as evidence about what she was capable of when she decided to do the thing she knew was right regardless of what it cost. She was going to be the kind of person who did not wait 7 months next time. She was going to be the kind of person who called on the first day. She was working on it. She had started. Detective Samuel Cross closed the Destiny Huang case file in April and submitted it to the archive. He had been working the case since July, and he had built it carefully, and it had produced the conviction and the sentence and the record. That was what the work was for. He thought about the text message sometimes. She should have moved. Sent 11 minutes after Destiny died. He thought about what it meant that those 4 words had been sent, in that specific register of casual, irritated finality, in the minutes immediately following the death of a 16-year-old girl. He thought about what it meant to plan something and execute it, and then immediately record, in your own words, your reaction to the outcome. She should have moved. As if Destiny had made an error. As if the fire and the blocked stairwell and the accelerant had been simply a consequence that Destiny could have avoided if she had made different choices. He sat with this. He had been in this work for 16 years, and he had encountered the specific quality that produces this kind of thinking before, not often, but before. The complete substitution of another person's reality with one's own narrative about them. The inability to locate, in the other person's experience, anything that was not already subordinated to one's own story. Destiny had written in May that maybe Mara could learn that other people were as real as she was. She had been right that it was something that could potentially be learned. She had been right that it was something Mara had not learned. Cross filed the case. He went to work on the next one. Judge Constance Bell went back to her docket. She had 17 cases pending, and she moved through them with the same focused, unhurried attention she brought to everything on her bench. She was asked, by a colleague who had heard about the sentencing through the courthouse's informal information network, whether the decision to remove Mara before delivering the sentence had been planned. "No," she said. "What made you decide?" Bell was quiet for a moment. She turned toward the gallery, she said. When she started to speak, she turned toward the gallery rather than toward the bench. In a sentencing hearing, the court is the address. The defendant was not addressing the court. She was addressing the audience she wanted. Her colleague waited. "I had been listening to this defendant perform for 8 months, Bell said. "I had read 7 days of trial transcript. I had read the text message from 6:52 in the morning on July 10th, and I had watched her walk into the sentencing hearing and within 30 seconds position herself to do the same thing she had been doing for 8 months, to use the room as a stage." She looked at her docket. "I decided that the room was not going to be her stage," she said, "and that the sentence did not require her presence to be complete. The sentence was for the record and for the Huang family and for the community. It was not for Mara Voss." She returned to her work. In Ashford, Georgia, the 7 pressed flower journals remained on the shelf in Destiny's room. Lin Huang had not moved them. She was not ready. She had developed, across the months since July, a relationship with the room that was complicated and specific. She could enter it. She could sit in it. She could be in the space where Destiny had been, but she could not yet interact with the objects in ways that involved altering their arrangement. The journals were where Destiny had put them, organized by year, and they were going to stay there until Lin was ready. She was working on being ready. In the meantime, she had started something of her own. A journal. Not of pressed flowers, she was not and had never been someone who pressed flowers. That had been Destiny's thing, the specific collector's instinct that was Destiny's and not hers, and she was not going to try to replicate it. She was writing. Not formally, not for any purpose beyond the writing, just the daily accumulation of what she was experiencing, the way you write when you need a container for what you cannot otherwise hold. She wrote about destiny. She wrote about the trial. She wrote about the March morning and the courtroom and the 3 words that had frozen the room. She wrote about the May 14th entry. She wrote about what it meant that Destiny had been hoping, in May, that Mara could learn the things she needed to learn. She wrote about what it meant to be the kind of person who keeps hoping that. She wrote about what it meant to be the kind of person who raised that person. She was still writing. Every day. She was going to keep writing. For as long as she needed. Which was the rest of her life. Which was what she had. The gray March sky outside the courthouse window had offered nothing and asked for nothing. In the journals on the shelf, the pressed flowers were exactly as Destiny had placed them. Held, organized by year. Exactly as they had been when they were beautiful. Still held exactly. Still here.